Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast. A SANS 2021 survey, Rethinking the Sec and DevSecOps, Security as Code, sponsored by Accurix, Aqua, For All Secure, Microfocus, Sysdig, and Veracode. My name is Carol, author of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Jim Bird, SANS Analyst, and Eric Johnson, Senior SANS Instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to turn the webcast over to our presenters.
All right, thank you, Carol. This is a SANS survey, Rethinking the Sec and DevSecOps, where myself, Eric Johnson, I'm a principal security engineer at Puma Security, as well as a SANS instructor and a co-author of Sec 540 and Sec 510, and Jim Bird, who is joining me on the webcast. Jim, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself here quick?
Sure, I'm a SANS analyst. I'm another one of the co-authors on SANS Sec 540. I've been working with SANS and OWASP for about the last, 10, 12 years. And I was up until recently a CTO of a global financial trading platform, and I'm in the process of trying to retire. So,
well, we're glad you could join us here today for your pre-retirement SANS survey adventures. Before we jump into the survey results, one note: if you're new to SANS or the SANS community, as Jim and I mentioned, we author one of the courses, Sec 540, but there's a tremendous amount of effort internally at SANS right now to building a foundation of cloud security. As you can see, over the last year, 488 Cloud Security Essentials has come out. The Sec 510, which is all about public cloud security across AWS, Azure, and GCP, as well as new courses on Kubernetes and containers, and 584 and 588 on cloud pen testing. We've now got incident response and cloud forensics coming out. So a lot of cool resources and courses that you can learn as if this subject matter interests you, and the things that Jim and I will go through seem exciting. Make sure to check us out at sans.org/cloud security. So Jim, I'll pass it to you to introduce the survey and what we've been up to here for the last few months.
All right, so what we did is we wanted to focus this year. This is about our 8th or 9th, I think, survey, annual survey, focusing on AppSec and cloud security from a coding perspective. So this year, we wanted to explore the idea of what it means for security and coding. We will be presenting a quick summary of the study today, and the paper will be up later today, I believe. Yeah. As well, there's a follow-up panel, first of the follow-up panels next week. That will be with some cloud and DevSecOps leaders from SANS, from Accurix, and from For All Secure. And so, if you want to follow up on more on that, that'll be next week. So we took a look at 4 different areas here about the future of security, being security as code. We will look at it from what does it mean when the cloud is all in code now, or should be in code? How does it, what happens when you start thinking about configuration management all being done in code? We start looking at in depth at continuous integration and continuous delivery, and then the final steps moving forward. So what does this mean to security professionals and organizations? What does it mean from a standpoint of training and skills, for tooling, technology, and priorities and goals? So let's see here. This is now back to you, Eric, right? Yeah. Is it?
Sounds good. Yeah. So the cloud as code was our first kind of lens that we took a look at, and year over year, as Jim mentioned, this is what, number 8th survey or so, where we've always looked at velocity first and said, how fast are people moving? And up front, I think a lot of our early on numbers were focused on application delivery. And the word application over the years has evolved as we start building more things in code and using CI/CD to deliver other things such as config management and cloud. We're seeing that organizations are delivering features faster than ever. So we've got now 75% of orgs are delivering changes to production more than once a month. And in some prior positions, I was on teams where we only deliver once a quarter at one point. So it was, you can see the trend line here growing. We're 14% increase in velocity during the past 5 years. So it's important to keep, from a security perspective, keep in mind, what does that mean to security, knowing that things are changing that fast underneath us inside of the organization. If you take a look at that velocity and how fast it's moving, and then take a look at where are we delivering things to, it's also interesting to take a look at how many different cloud providers companies are using. So you've got these systems maybe being built on-prem, and then they're being pushed out into, now more than 57% of the orgs on this year's survey say that they're using 3 or more cloud platforms. And for those of us that have worked inside of the major cloud platforms such as Azure or AWS or GCP, we know how complicated they are. And then you realize that you've got to understand more than one, or in this case, half of us are having to understand more than three or more. So there's a lot to think about in terms of the security impact there. The more platforms you're using, you've got compounded security risks. Some of the reasons behind this, we've seen mergers and acquisitions. You go acquire some company and suddenly now you're using Azure, even though you didn't really have anybody internally that was using that particular cloud vendor. So the increase in velocity seems to be also lending itself towards using that capability to deliver to multiple cloud providers as well, with those numbers increasing, which made me interested in, okay, so what are our security professionals actually focusing on now? Our traditional tasks, maybe running like static and dynamic scans and doing code reviews and things like that. And how are we now treating the cloud providers? And last year we had this number on the survey, and I think, Jim, we highlighted that this was lacking a little bit. We weren't spending enough time looking at cloud security. And then this year's numbers, it kind of made me smile when I saw these, where we had a 22% increase over the 2020 survey results, where the majority are at least spending half of their time on public cloud security responsibilities now. So at least as we venture out and we're moving features faster into multiple clouds, we're now focusing on those areas quite a bit more heavily than we were a year ago. Another reason I think behind the increase in velocity, particularly with cloud, is basically because we're defining our cloud infrastructure as code now. At least we should be, as you said. As you take a look at the numbers here, only a third, about 34% of the organizations have moved into cloud automation, with infrastructure as code. And I think as that number continues to trend up, we'll probably continue to see velocity keep increasing. And the reason that we are recommending infrastructure as code, particularly for your cloud, is because building things manually in the web UI is very slow. And it's very hard to scale that across, multiple accounts or multiple environments like dev and stage and prod and things like that. And then there's the human factor too, which is, I checked the wrong box, or I pushed the wrong button and I did something that I shouldn't have done, which can cause security concerns. So as you look at the tooling there, all the cloud providers have their native infrastructure as code tooling. You'll see AWS CloudFormation and YAML. You've got Azure Resource Manager and JSON. You've got GCP's Deployment Manager, which writes templates in Jinja, YAML, or Python. So lots of options there. And then you've got kind of the standalone HashiCorp Terraform, which is a language agnostic way to write code for all the clouds. So I think over the last year or so, we've really seen adoption for Terraform take off, because you can learn one language or one syntax instead of the unique syntax that's forced upon you by the cloud provider, which allows you to move faster. It also allows you to deploy to multiple cloud providers using the same language, and it also allows our security professionals to do code reviews against one language and understand what that looks like. So I think that's the reason that you're seeing Terraform kind of take off. Now, we didn't put much code in our actual paper, even though we're talking about security as code the entire time. So I wanted to throw at least one slide in here that kind of showed everybody on the call, this is how easy it is to write security as code using something like Terraform, where we're going in. The top example here is showing AWS Security Hub being enabled. So 3 to 4 lines of Terraform that our security professionals can put into a version control system and push that out through a CI/CD pipeline to turn on security features in the cloud. The bottom one is turning on Azure's Security Center, which is the equivalent way to monitor VMs and things like that over in the Azure ecosystem. So this example just shows how important it is for security professionals to understand cloud infrastructure as code, and also illustrate the power of being able to write and or review and or scan some of this stuff. So as you look at security in code, now that we've got our infrastructure written in code, we can start to scan code with a number of different tools. Traditional code analysis tools don't really work here as far as scanning your infrastructure code, but there are a number of tools focused on scanning Terraform. This is TerraScan by Accurix, and this is saying essentially, let's go ahead and scan the source code directory. The template syntax is Terraform, and we're giving it the type of Azure, and you can see it go through and kind of run those traditional static analysis rules, except this time it's looking and saying, hey, you know, you've got an Azure key vault, but you know, logging is disabled, so you're not going to get any diagnostic data on key usage or anything of that nature. So it's a nice progression for security professionals to go from doing reviews on cloud infrastructure and then contributing to a CI/CD pipeline, and maybe even putting in tests like this to look for some of those misconfigurations that can cause security issues. So Jim, I'll pass it back to you. Take us through config management as code. What do you think about the numbers on that side?
Well, one of the things we wanted to take a look at here was around different runtime architectures and runtime platforms that people are using, organizations are using. What does that mean from a security and code perspective? And so what we found here was we looked at a progression from on-premises to the different cloud architectures or runtime architectures, right? So as you move along here from on-premise to the right, you shift operational complexity and costs, the compliance response, some of the compliance responsibilities and security risks onto the cloud provider, obviously, right? That's one of your goals here, is to try to simplify your operational environment. But you end up with new security risks and security issues that you have to manage, right? Just like, as Eric pointed out, when you're working with multiple cloud security providers, almost every organization here is working with some combination of different runtime architectures. We're seeing a roughly even split here between on-premises and cloud-hosted virtual machines. So we're seeing more and more work being shifted over from on-premise onto cloud VMs, which is a natural progression. And then we're also seeing a fair number of work being shifted onto cloud-hosted container services. We're going to take a look at that in some more detail in a bit here. One of the things that we're also taking a look at is the advantages of abstraction and linking of tools together as you're working. So as Eric pointed out, you want to take advantage of scanning. You want to take advantage of coding, not just because of the efficiency and the reproducibility or repeatability, but you also want to do that from a transparency standpoint, a testability standpoint, an auditability standpoint. So here's another example of some code where we're automating gold images in AWS, right? using Ansible and Packer. So you start to get an ability to link and thread these tools together to create, to automate tasks and to simplify your work. But as well, you're now creating a reproducible and transparent, auditable path towards production. From a containers as a service standpoint, again, we're seeing about 38% of workloads have been shifted onto container as a service platforms in the cloud. There's obvious advantages to this, right? Because if you're working on premise with containers, we know the container use has exploded, right? It's so convenient from a packaging standpoint for developers and for operations people and for security professionals, right? Because a lot of security tools come packaged already in containers like Docker. And of course, you've also got the advantages of runtime isolation. But as you get to scale, the whole idea of managing all these containers at runtime and through the cycle of promotion to runtime is very complex. So the idea here is to, what we're seeing is more organizations taking a natural step to moving this on to cloud managed platforms. Again, shifting some of these responsibilities onto the cloud service provider. It's important to keep in mind, though, as you make this shift, that you still have some key responsibilities. So one is to make sure that the actual configuration of the runtime of the cloud runtime environment, right, is correct. So as Eric said, you got to be watching out for errors, whether those are errors in manual configuration or errors in code. That's still a very important part of it. You also have to be checking for defaults because some of these environments, again, by default, tend to leave the environment somewhat open because it gets you up and running fast. But as you start moving more workloads into that, you have some concerns to manage. And then you have to worry about the actual contents and configuration of the container itself, the image of the container itself, right? So there's, again, scanning tools that'll come to your help for this, but you've got to make sure that the scanning tools are enabled properly and that you're actually managing the scanning results, right? So there's a whole another ecosystem, security ecosystem here that you have to be aware of. And finally, you have to take a look at runtime detection and incident response, right? Make sure that your tools and approaches are cloud are container aware, because again, with ephemeral, I can't say ephemeral, ephemeral containers, right? You're gonna be seeing all kinds of changes in your runtime environment, and you want to make sure that your monitoring and incident detection and tools are aware that you're running containers. And there's certain tools and approaches that you need to take for that. And sorry, oh yeah, and again, we have the security configuration here. So security teams need to help write and review the infrastructure configuration. Here's an example on Azure for the Kubernetes service. Point here is to be able to understand this environment, work with the DevOps teams, and finally, you want to make sure that you get, if you're doing anything in code, whether it's your own tests, whether it's the operational configuration or the application code, you want to get that into CI/CD pipelines, and that's what Eric's going to be talking about next. There we go.
All right. Yeah, some good insight there. I thought it was interesting, the numbers that we saw with just the different container services being used. And I think I'm continuously surprised at how many are choosing to run their container workloads on VMs that they're managing versus the cloud managed platforms, just because they do make it a lot easier to spin things up and you don't have to manage as much. But again, yeah, then you've got some of that responsibility, or I guess less control or less visibility into the environment. The CI/CD section Jim and I took a look at to begin with was just, okay, organizations, if they're delivering this fast, they've got to be using some automation to make things consistent and repeatable. And we've seen that in the numbers year over year. This might be one of the higher response rates that we've seen as far as just using automated builds, automated testing, CI and CD. So you got 52% saying that, yeah, we're using CI pipelines for everything. And as we pointed out, that's now including cloud configuration as code for building your cloud resources and your cloud infrastructure. It's for configuration management pipelines for building gold images, using Packer and Ansible. Obviously, the core focus for this was delivering applications and maybe putting that inside of a container that's going to run on that gold image or in the cloud. And 42%, it seems a little low to me still, just using CD to deliver those things into the production environment. CI historically is automated tests and making sure you've got high code coverage and making sure that your code is working, versus CD is actually putting the container on that instance and spinning it up in prod. So it's interesting to me that there's that big of a differential between the CI and the CD numbers. Good to see that we've got 66% using automated builds there, but that's at least the breakdown of the different sorts of Agile or DevOps principles that are being used across our respondents this year. The platforms that they're using, this one just makes me smile. I still go back to a keynote that I saw John Steven give a couple years back, who used to work at Cigital in this space, and he said Jenkins, dominated the CI/CD landscape for the last 10 years, and it's still the most commonly used open source tool that we've got. It's got great sets of plugins. It's very extensible, but it comes with its own responsibility model. You have to maintain the server that Jenkins is running on. You have to patch Jenkins. You have to upgrade the plugins, which are open source dependencies. And as we've seen, supply chain has been talked about quite a bit. And those components and plugins in Jenkins are an attack vector, in a sense, from a red team perspective. So you've seen the numbers shift this year. Last year, Jenkins was on the top, or using on-prem open source, which I'm assuming is mostly Jenkins. And then you have the newcomer, the cloud hosted or version control native, would maybe be another word for it, solutions from GitHub and GitLab and Azure DevOps, for example. And you're seeing now those numbers are reversed. Instead of Jenkins being 55 and the GitHub GitLabs being down in the high 40s, we're now seeing Jenkins slip a little bit, and we're seeing those version control native solutions take the lead now at 55%. And that echoes what John Stevens said in that keynote. And what all he said was the next 10 years are going to be dominated by the version control providers, GitHubs and GitLabs of the world. And it's not just on the CI/CD side. They've got a tremendous amount of security capabilities now, code analysis, secret scanning. GitLab's got auto DevOps, where you just check some code in and then it'll just go ahead and, based on the files it finds, it'll build and scan everything for you. So kind of a one click button way to get things built, at least from a CI perspective. So I'm not shocked that this year we saw GitHub Actions and GitLab CI leading the way, because it gives you a lot of capabilities without the responsibility of babysitting the server and patching the server and dealing with just hardening the overall CI/CD system. There's still some work to do on the plugin side. I would say here, GitHub's marketplace for their actions is growing rapidly. I think the last time I looked, 7,000 or 8,000 custom actions that you can add in from vendors. So we're seeing a lot of security tooling being added to that marketplace as things move along. But there's still a fair amount of customization that you've got to do on your own, just writing scripts to do things that maybe Jenkins offers you from a plugin perspective. So I think we'll continue to see the numbers move in this direction, is my gut, as the marketplaces mature and they become more user-friendly versus us having to do that work ourselves. Here's an example again. So this is YAML, for those of you that have not seen YAML syntax before. One of the major reasons that I think security as code needs to be included in CI/CD is because you can start to wedge, again, security scanning into some of these templates. So this is a GitHub action. And the GitHub action just is a number of jobs, and each job has a number of steps. And what you're seeing here is a step that configures some AWS access keys, which just screams security needs to understand this code. So we need to understand that, oh, good, this secret is coming out of the GitHub secret storage area, so we're not hard coding credentials or anything like that. And then those secrets are being used in the next step to deploy a container out to an Amazon ECS container cluster. But we're also missing some things. You know, security, if we're involved here, would know that, yeah, we should probably maybe be scanning that image for vulnerabilities. And we can wedge that just with 3 or 4 more lines of YAML. You know, we can kick off a Trivy container scan here and get some actual vulnerability analysis before we push that container out to the cluster. So I think that's a big step for security as we move forward, is to understand how these, you know, version control native workflow files work, what the YAML syntax looks like, and kind of step in and learn and help lead some of our security automation in this phase of the pipeline. As you think down that path, another question that we had in there was, well, how are we doing with compliance as code? You know, you might have a policy that says all container images need to be scanned with Trivy. And how are we doing by putting those compliance policies into code versus security doing their traditional path, which is, well, let's just do all of our scanning kind of off on our own silo, and, you know, we'll send those PDF reports over to the DevOps teams and tell them, you know, we've got to go fix some stuff. So how are we doing it bridging these two worlds? And it was good, I thought, positive to see that 62% of the folks said that they're enforcing now, you know, more than 50% of their policies in those YAML files or in those declarative Jenkins files and things like that. So it is nice to see compliance being moved into some of the CI/CD workflows.
One of the things I wanted to add about the compliance in code is the benefits of doing this. Once you have everything into your pipelines, you have everything in code, you're moving your changes, both your infrastructure changes and your application changes through this model. It's a beautiful thing from an auditor's perspective. Once you can explain how you do what you do, and you can show them the test results, the code, makes an enormous difference from a auditing standpoint. I've gone through SOC 2 audits and all kinds of other audits and organizations where once you can show them how you do this, the auditing process and the timeline comes down. It's a very nice thing. It's a much more successful process. And what's the beautiful thing about it is that it's built in. So all you're doing is you're adding some additional tests along the way that are good for you, and it's good for the auditors, right? Because you can show that on every change you verified that you're using a certain version of something, or that some service has been turned off, or whatever it might be that you need to do for establishing your compliance. But you can show this every time, and again, it increases your confidence from an operational standpoint, a security standpoint, as well as from a standpoint for the auditors themselves, right?
Yeah, while we're on that topic, Jim, I'm curious, and I get this question a lot as you're talking about kind of moving forward, I guess, is you start to do that. Have you run into situations with auditors where they don't understand that control, or they think that's not an appropriate way of dealing with that compliance requirement, or maybe you have to kind of retrain the auditor or kind of teach them about the new ways that we're doing that stuff?
I've had both experiences. So if for example, you're working with an auditing firm that you hire, so let's say you're doing something like a SOC 2, you can find a SOC 2 auditing firm that'll get it. And once they get it, they're so happy because it's so much easier, right? If you're dealing with certain regulators, they have their checklist. They don't particularly care what it is that you're doing. They just need to see this screen. So you show them this screen, right? It's unfortunate, but I think over time, as they get educated, about the benefits of this, they start asking more for those types of things, right? For the code-based assets. And like I said, I still show them this stuff. They might not accept it, but over time it gets reinforced and they're like, oh, that's very cool. It also does increase their confidence, right? So if you show them their screen that they still wanted, but you've already shown them some other test stuff, which they didn't ask for, they get this feeling like, okay, these guys know what they're doing. I can go on and focus on some other kind of problem, right? When we take a look at the success factors, this has been interesting, and this has been a consistent trend for the last few years in our surveys around application security and DevSecOps, is that the success factors that organizations are reporting are more around organizational success factors, cultural success factors. They're about management, these kind of things. So, for example, the number one success factor this year was training developers in secure coding, which is good from a SANS perspective, right? But the point about the training program, right, is we looked at the training program from a couple of different perspectives. One is that you need to train engineers, like developers and operations engineers, in secure coding concepts, and defensive coding, and the tooling, right? But we also need to train security professionals in coding practices. So things that we found in both surveys and working with organizations is that security professionals need to understand things like version control, check-in workflows, right? They need to understand the continuous integration and build workflows, and to make sure that they can use them for their own tools, right? For their own work, as well as help engineers with them, right? So this is a key area of focus, I think, as more people move towards increasing automation, is to make sure that you're very comfortable, that you understand how Git works, and you understand or whatever version management version control system that your teams are using. You understand how continuous integration works, can help the teams with it, because something like continuous integration and continuous delivery becomes a key control plane for security teams, right? It's now a place where you end up spending a lot of your time, because you can help add checks, you can check results, you can look for things like how much testing is being done, all those things within that particular area. The other management areas that we're seeing people having success with is improving communications across disciplines, and again, securing buy-in from managers and developers. And a lot of this has to do with organization-wide or departmental initiatives towards DevOps or Agile programs, or whatever, Agile transformations, whatever these organizations are doing to move faster, to improve communications. By moving faster and improving communications, it also helps to improve the effectiveness of your security program, which is great, right? We're now seeing this as being an enabling factor, a success factor, as opposed to like a risk from a security perspective, right? It used to be that those Agile development teams are delivering once a month. What the heck is going on? We got to slow this down. To now people are delivering 10 times a day, but they're doing this in an open and collaborative way. So we better all understand how to work and take advantage of that and leverage it for success. From our conclusions, what we focused on was we understand that as security is moving more into code, as organizations are moving more into the cloud, everything's moving into code, right? So as this happens, there's big challenges to face, but there's also a number of possibilities here to make your world better, and to make your applications in your whole environment more secure. So first we have security in coding, which is your classic AppSec stuff, right? Which is the training engineers not to do stupid things, adding scanning to make sure they don't do stupid things, doing things like trying to hijack their application testing, right? Their unit testing, and adding testing in that way. By the way, I used to be a developer, so I know that developers do stupid things. That's not insulting anybody there, right? I was a developer and development manager, so I understand that, and ran development teams. We're also looking at this aspect of coding and security, right? So we're saying that Security professionals need to be more comfortable working in code. They need to be able to read code. They need to be able to write code. You can put compliance tests into code, assertions into code. You can put in all kinds of security tests into code. You need to make sure that code is being scanned and that the scan results are actually being reviewed and being addressed. This is now quite a change in priorities and a change in focus. And finally, you need to worry about securing the code and the build environments, right? So everybody knows about what happened with the SolarWinds hack, right? So we have a case of a CI/CD environment essentially being hacked and subverted, right? Poisoned. So you have to make sure that this entire environment, it used to be that the focus was on your external network, right? Now your focus from a security perspective needs to include the code, the whole code pipeline, because if your configuration's in code, if your compliance environment's in code, if your security tests are in code, and your application's all in code, you better make sure that that code is protected, and that the whole build environment, compile build environment, and delivery pipeline is protected. So this is now increasing, if you will, the attack surface within an organization, but it's there's with the advantages of working in code come this responsibilities, right? I think that's oh yeah, we're on to the Q&A. I think that's Carol now, right?
All right. Yeah, thanks for that great presentation. If anyone has a question for our presenters, please enter it into the questions window now. Let's see, our first one asks, I passed my GCSA last week and it was a fantastic course. As a security architect, should I spend time learning Terraform, or is it enough to know that we need scan Terraform code to ensure security is configured?
I like that question. That's a good one. Jim, what are your thoughts? I'm curious, as more of the CTO level, which one do you think is more valuable?
You got to make sure at least that it's being scanned. The scanners are good, right? So we're finding that this has been an interesting progression, right? In that when they first started off, most of the scanners were just syntax, linters, right? But now you're getting some powerful capabilities within these scanners. They're finding a lot of things that you may not even find in a manual review unless you really knew your stuff, right? So yep. I would say at a security architect role, that would probably that's certainly where you've got to start, right? Is there anything in particular if they wanted to learn something about Terraform or something? Where should they focus, Eric? What do you think? Is there particular areas?
Yeah, I mean, so that's was going to be my response too. Is if you're scanning it and you're looking at results, you're kind of going to have to go learn it in a sense to interpret the result and figure out if that particular misconfiguration is a true positive or a false positive. So you're going to end up kind of in the documentation, which the Terraform provider docs are really, really good. That's usually all you need to figure out how to even go write it yourself. So you're inherently going to learn kind of how to write it by interpreting the scan results. So I think that's a great place to start. Once you get to the level of comfort with the syntax and how it looks, there's some good tutorials out there. HashiCorp has a bunch of kind of just HashiConf videos out there that I've looked at in the past, just learning how to configure a provider, how to authenticate to the cloud provider APIs, and slowly kind of build out a little bit of a playground or a sandbox, if you will. So that's the progression I would take as well.
All right, thank you. This next one says, so Jim and Eric, there seem to be 3 layers of DevSecOps: security hardening maturity content, IAC security, for example, scan TF code, application as a code, CI/CD, security scanning. You know what, I'm gonna send this to you in the chat window. I feel like I'm not putting emphasis on the punctuation. So let me send this to you.
Yeah, I think I understand where that question was headed, which is
okay. Well,
there's a lot
I'll finish reading it to the group so that they know. But let's see, application as a code, security scanning, for example, containers, KB, and then actual application code security. Any thoughts? Thanks.
Yeah, Jim, what do you think about learning to tackle all of those layers? It seems like we're forced to understand basically everybody has to be a full stack engineer at this point, or are we still going to bring on cross-functional and or different teams to manage some of this stuff?
Yeah, here you're right. There's a number of different problems. So I think this is a reasonable breakdown here, right? The infrastructure as code security, the application as code, and then the and worrying about the coding practices and stuff. It's not possible for everybody, unless you're Eric, to be an expert in all those different things. That's why Eric's a teacher, right? An instructor, and tells everybody how to do it. What you need to be able to look at is how can you work with the experts in your organization, right? There are people in your organization that are going to understand Terraform or CloudFormation way better than you're ever going to be able to, and you don't need to be able to be an expert in that. It's the same thing with the GitHub configuration and stuff, right? Some of that stuff you need to understand what's possible, but you don't need to own those things. What you need to do is find the right people there and get them on side with some of the priorities, right? One of the we're still working with this idea of security champions, right? So security champions within application development, security champions within infrastructure, security champions within the rollout and release management side. You still need to build and nurture those relationships and create those responsibilities within the organization. Lean on those people and get their help, right? And if you can find the right people and make this an interesting technical challenge, part of what's interesting now, the way things have changed with everything moving into code, is that this is something that engineers understand and care about. If you tell them that their code is bad, right? Like if you can show them that their code is bad, like it's actually flawed, right? It's not that they didn't write good code, but they have flaws in it, right? In some way, there's mistakes in there that they need to learn about. They can do something about it, right? They can do something about it up front and along the process. And I've had a lot of good success with that approach. Maybe again, coming from a development background, it's more natural. But I think that's one of the things that you need to be able to do is you need to spend time understanding these things and finding the smart people in your organization that are willing and able to help you, right, and take responsibility for parts of those problems.
Yeah, I agree. I think you can't become an expert in all these layers overnight. It requires partnering with folks. And I'm similar to Jim, development background. I did AppSec for 7-8 years. So I kind of started at the top layer and then kind of worked my way down the funnel to the bottom layer, which is kind of our cloud infrastructure at this point. And most of that was done by kind of on-the-job training. So you switch teams, go work on, if you can, job rotations, I think would be helpful for partnering with folks and understanding kind of these different areas that are going on. And you do see a lot of teams divide responsibilities too, I think. You've got your cloud infrastructure team that's managing the bottom part. You might have your gold images team that's building and hardening some of the actual VMs that you're running. And then you've got your kind of, I would say, the DevOps team that's largely managing the container and then the application code that's running in it. So I like the 3 layers that were provided in that question. I think it's pretty accurate of what you're going to run into as far as skill sets go.
All right, thanks. The next one asks, are you aware of any kind IAC or YAML, YAML templates that translate to CIS controls?
Oh man, trying to think. So infrastructure, I'm assuming we're talking about the CIS benchmarks for the cloud, or are we talking CIS, or we're talking critical security controls, like the top 20? I'm guessing, is that how you interpret that, Jim?
I thought of it as the top 20, but there certainly are lots of tools that come for the cloud controls, right? The CIS benchmarks, those are well defined, and so you can look at things like dev-sec.io, or you can, most of the scanners will do a CIS benchmark kind of compliance scan, right, against configuration guidelines. Against the CIS critical controls, not so much, because that's more of a organizational overview, right? So I don't see how you could apply that. I don't think you could. I'm not aware of anything that would help you with that in that particular space, except for around the configuration management side, right, where you've got the CIS benchmarks being enforced, or through scanning, or through something like dev-sec.io.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was. I view the top 20 as a kind of an organizational guideline, and maybe high level directives that can help you build out policies and standards and things like that. But yeah, all the cloud providers have their native scanners, Security Hub, Security Center, and GCP Security Command Center that scan for CIS benchmarks, and they also have their own foundational benchmarks that are much more in depth than CISs are, as far as cloud security posture hardening and things like that. So those are some automated ways to do those sorts of scans that I've seen some good success with.
All right, thanks. The next one asks, is there an online catalog of scanners for IAC, SAST, DAST, compliance, etc.?
That's a tough one. I've seen a couple of Git repos. Jim, are you aware of one that's being maintained?
Yeah, there's a good Git repo. I just got to remember it. I need a moment to think about it. So let's just, I'll do a little check-in here. But
yeah, I'm doing a Google on the side. But let's, Carol, is there another question queued up we can discuss while we search for that?
Sure. Does SANS have any future courses planned for DevSecOps?
That's a good question. To my knowledge, the foundational, if you're just thinking DevSecOps, Sec 534 is right now a 2-day course. It's an intro to DevSecOps course. I know Ben Allen is working hard on adding a 3rd day to that as kind of a foundational entry point. And then Sec 540 is a nice combination of hands-on DevOps, but applying it to cloud infrastructure journey. And Andy Martin and his team at Control Plane are building out Sec 584 at the moment, which right now is 3 days. It will eventually be 5 days. And that's all cloud native containers and Kubernetes security. So at the moment, those are the foundational, I would say, DevSecOps oriented courses. And I believe the general blue team curriculum is working on, and I don't know the number. I know I saw somebody mentioning a little bit of an outline for it, and it's going to be more kind of blue team playbook responses oriented. So kind of doing DevSecOps with blue team activities. So keep your eye out for that. That's probably way too early to tell what that deadline might be for turning that course in, but that's at least as much as I know at the moment anyway.
All right, thanks. You ready for one more, or do you want me to give you pause while you're checking on something else?
I found
Go ahead, Jim.
Did you find? I found that one of these awesome lists. It's a good one. I think I stuck it in there. Yeah. For the analysis stuff, there's one of these. One of the best ways is just to do a Google search on GitHub, awesome, and then something like static analysis or something like that, right? So this one comes up. This is a very well maintained one. GitHub.com/analysis-tools-dev/static-analysis.
Yeah, perfect. That's the same one I landed on as well.
Yeah, that's the one we've used before in referencing classes and stuff, right? So.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Well, we have one more here. It says the proliferation of as code capabilities requires accuracy and static analysis. Are we seeing less false positives when it comes to IAC and config scanning versus source code?
I like that one. So I've spent a fair amount of time analyzing results from both at this point, and we know false positives are prevalent in code analysis tools, but in the world of kind of analyzing Java, C#, Python code, where it's actual applications and you've got potentially 1 million lines of code and all those different code execution paths that data can flow through, I think the opportunity for false positives is a lot higher there because it is so complex. And when you look at infrastructure code, especially a declarative syntax like Terraform or CloudFormation is, there's not nearly as much code flow. It's a standalone resource with some configuration settings to a value. Yes, some of them can be parameterized, so you may not know what the value of that parameter is, to make a determination on if you've got a misconfiguration or something like that. But because of the more static nature of those declarative resources just sitting there, I do think the cloud infrastructure scanning is more accurate. That said, you still have false positives. I still get findings that say, hey, Eric, your S3 bucket's open, and, it's public to the internet, and it's on purpose. It's a statically hosted website, so you still have to suppress some of that stuff, and you may not purposely turn something on an individual resource, like in an EBS volume for encryption, because you've got an account level encryption control in place, and that every single volume that's created out of the box will have a KMS key applied to it. So you may see a false positive there, but it's because you put a control outside of the scanner's visibility. So there will be false positives, but I don't think it's not going to be the kind of scan where you get 10,000 findings out of the box and 9,000 are false positives or anything like that. It's not to that level, at least in my experience.
All right, well, that's all the questions I'm seeing submitted. Do either of you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share?
Sure. I was going to ask Jim a question.
Well, actually, my apologies. One just popped in. How do you propose handling auto-generated code that is added as part tool processing in the CI/CD pipeline?
Oof, that's a good one. You think we scan it, Jim, or do we say the tool is right?
I think you scan it. If it's code, scan it.
Yeah, why not, right?
Right.
So I'd say scan it. Some of them do have the ability to suppress or at least ignore some of that stuff too. So if you are seeing lots of noise and nothing valuable in the results after you scan it and take a look at them, you can then start to weed those out as well.
All right, thanks. Well, now we can move on to the question you had for Jim.
Yeah, so we ask a question about organizational challenges and kind of what are the biggest barriers to doing this? And at the enterprise level, I think everyone would agree it's much harder to do this in a big enterprise where things were just built siloed to begin with. So what do you think are maybe the top 3 things that we can focus on to overcome some of those challenges that we're facing?
Well, I think one of them is that if your organization has a Agile or DevOps kind of initiative going on, if they're doing this because they want to decrease development costs or increase velocity, take advantage of that. Don't get in the way of that. Try to find a way to get involved and help build some of these things in from the beginning, right? So if you can get people to put in some scanning and to work on make sure that they have a good test automation process in place and an automated build process, even just having the basic disciplines in place, right, are important. So one would be take advantage of those of any kind of initiative in that particular way. The other part is to look at things like the enabling technical practices, right? So one of the things we looked at in this survey was, how much are people doing automated builds? How much are they doing automated testing? How much are they doing, continuous integration, continuous delivery? This is another place where security needs to belong and can add value as long as they're being careful, right? Like don't add a whole bunch of scans that take an hour into a process that's supposed to take run for a minute or 2 minutes or something, right? But understand how you can get involved in some of those technical practices and use them as a auditable control, in itself is important. And then for a big part of this is think of things iteratively. Think of change, organizational change and technical change as an iterative incremental process. So you don't need to, and you can't, put in everything from the beginning, try to make all the changes in the beginning, unless you're in some highly critical environment, right? Or you've just had a major mistake, maybe you're given the ability, if you've just had a major breach, right? I'm sure at SolarWinds, they're doing everything really, really well now, right? As an example. Think of things as, how are you going to identify their major risks? Where can you get the most return with the simplest changes to people's workflows? Tools that have the best accuracy or speed. Make sure that you're really focusing on real risks and do this on an iterative basis. Because once you've got teams working a particular way and they accept it, like I think about when I started doing this, we introduced static analysis, scanning of application code. I don't know, like in my last organization was like 13, 14 years ago. And we started off with something simple. We started adding more manual code reviews as well. So we started saying, okay, listen, let's do code reviews and static scanning, and we focused on very important findings, right? So we ignored all the stuff that wasn't going to cause crashes or something, and let's just start with that, and then slowly start to widen the filters, right, the funnel for that, and get the code review discipline. It took years to get a really good code review discipline going. It's much easier nowadays with the new workflows, but to get a truly effective code review discipline in place took a long time. But once you have those things, you can just start to again widen it, train people so that they do a better job, add a few more tests in, and it just gets better and better and better all the time. And I think that's it, is taking that incremental iterative approach to change and to risk management.
Excellent. I love it. I love picking your brain on that stuff. I think that's a perfect way to close the session out.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jim and Eric, for your great presentation. And to Accurix, Aqua for All Secure, Micro Focus, Sysdig, and Veracode for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.